Okay, then I'll start reading each sentence. Okay, and then we will see. I'm beginning. I said that we will first summarize the previous paragraph. Okay, and then we will proceed with this one. So, the previous paragraph, Srimba is saying there are 4 ways of knowing. Okay, knowledge is of 4 ways. The first one is our own level, where we do not know somebody else or something else, but we know it because our senses are there. If my senses are not there, I can know nothing at all. Okay, so it is through the senses. Therefore, it is indirect. We have to use senses to know the physical world or somebody else. Okay, so it is separative, indirect knowledge. Separative because if I am looking at Shilpa or Sumti, I will only see their body and I will hear their sounds if they are speaking. But I will not know what their soul is and all. So it is a superficial and separative. So it is separative, indirect. Indirect means I have to use between the knowledge, between the knower and the known, there is something which are the senses. This is the first. The second one is when I go to the spiritual levels of consciousness, I don't need to use my senses. I can see Sumki's thoughts, I can see Shilpa's thoughts, I can see Kiran's thoughts. So I don't need these senses. I can also understand what you are feeling. So everything, so that is direct separative knowledge. You are still, you are separate from me. The third and the last one, I'll tell you the last one first, the fourth one, it is total identification. It is direct, non-separative knowledge. Direct, unificative knowledge. Because I become what I want to know. Okay? If mother wants to know what I've written to mother for a difficulty. Mother, I have this difficulty. So what does one mother do? She will identify herself with me and immediately she will know what my difficulty is because now that difficulty becomes hers. So this is knowledge by identity and unificated. So identifying direct knowledge. That's the last. And the third one is the same thing at a slightly lesser level. So these are the 4 ways of knowing. Now I come to the summary of what he had said in the previous paragraph. The first way of knowing can best be illustrated, although defectively, by our own awareness of our thoughts and emotions. Because we identify ourselves with our own thoughts and emotions. So we know them. I don't need my senses to know my thoughts and my emotions. I look into myself and see my thoughts and emotions. So it is direct, without use of senses. Of nothing else in the world are we aware in the same manner as we know ourselves. Obviously, we become anger when it overpowers us. This power also obtains with love, grief, and joy. When I'm in sorrow, I become sorrow. When I'm in love, I become love and joy. But the identification is not complete. There is a separation between the knower and the known. Part of us becomes anger as a small part stands back. Identification is not complete. This is he explaining the knowledge at our level and giving an example. Okay, that's all he has done. Okay, so now we go to the para that we have to read today. This identification of myself with my own anger, with my own sorrow, with my own love and grief. Okay? This identification is possible, and also this simultaneous separation and partial identification, because these things are becomings of our being. Becomings means at the lower level, they are in transition. Love is not permanent and fixed. It is coming and going. It is moving. It is sometimes less, sometimes more. That's what it meant by becoming. Becoming is always associated with movement. Okay? The being is always associated with non-movement, something permanent, something immutable, it does not move. So, because these things are becomings of our being, determinations of our mind stuff and mind energy. The mind substance is making these, giving form to love, grief, sorrow, and all. Mind energy of our life stuff and life energy. So all these things are in the level 1. Okay? But since they are only a small part of us, we are not bound to be identified and occupied. We can detach ourselves, separate the being from its temporary becoming. We can, in this way, temporary becoming, observe it, control it, sanction or prevent its manifestation. So what Swami is saying here is that although we become anger, we need not become anger necessarily or grief. We can watch it. Oh, I am becoming angry. So you have not identified yourself fully. You have separated yourself. I am in sorrow. Then you start analyzing. Why am I feeling sorrowful? Why am I feeling depressed? So you are looking at yourself. You are not identifying yourself. So in the level 1, the first knowledge, you can identify yourself with your emotions and thoughts largely, but you can also step back and look at them. Okay? They're saying we can, in this way, by an inner detachment, a mental or spiritual separateness, partially or even fundamentally, liberate ourselves from the control of mind nature or vital nature over the being and assume the position of the witness, knower, and ruler. So witness, knower, and ruler, level 2. You can go and become a witness of your own body, witness of your own emotions. You are not identified now. I am seeing anger in me. I am seeing grief in me. You also become the knower of all these things and ruler at a later stage. When you become the ruler of your own being, you are at a very high level of consciousness. Okay? Thus, we have a double knowledge of the subjective movement. There is an intimate knowledge by identity of its stuff and its force of action, more intimate than we could have been by any entirely separated and objective knowledge, such as we get of things outside ourselves. If I see you getting angry or happy, it's not affecting me. Okay, so I can see it, but with only my senses. It is indirect. But when I get myself angry, when I am angry myself, I can identify myself with it. That's what Swami is saying. Okay. So, but you need not also. At our level, man can also look at himself objectively and separate himself from his thoughts and his emotions and his actions. But if he does that fully, he is in the level 2. He is in the spiritual plane of consciousness. You have become the witness. You are in the self. You are in the Brahman consciousness. Witness, knower, and ruler is possible only in level 2, Brahman consciousness, spiritual planes of consciousness. Thus, we have a double knowledge of the subjective movement. There is an intimate knowledge by identity of its stuff and its force of action, more intimate than we could have been by any entirely separative and objective knowledge, such as we get of things outside us. Things that are to us altogether not self. They are separate from me. I am self and the others are not self. They are separate. There is at the same time a knowledge by detached observation. Detached but with the power of direct contact, which frees us from engrossment by the nature energy and enables us to relate the movement to the rest of our own existence and world existence. So this is also partly true. That's what Sim is saying. There is at the same time a knowledge by detached observation. Okay. detached, but with the power of direct contact. This is separating direct knowledge. Second type of knowledge, which frees us from engrossment by the nature energy and enables us to relate the movement to the rest of our own existence and world existence. So level 2, you don't use spiritual, you don't use your gross senses, but you are identified with what you are not identified, you are seeing things. Okay. So if we are, where is it gone? Just 1 minute, I've lost it. Yeah. If we are without this detachment, we lose our self of being and mastering knowledge in the nature self of becoming and movement and action. And though we know intimately the movement, we do not know it dominatingly and fully. Even when I know that I've got angry, I do not know exactly why I've got angry, from where it came, what is the cause. I don't know fully. This would not be the case if we carried our identification, if we carried into our identification with the movement, our identity with the rest of the subjective existence. If that is to say, we could plunge wholly into this wave of becoming, if that is to say, we could plunge wholly. Acharya has joined, but not Yasmin. Yasmin has not joined. Anyway, but this, if that is to say, we could plunge wholly. Yes, bonjour. You are not in Pondi, no?
No, Rangad, I'll be returning day after. On Saturday.
Okay, right. If we are without this detachment, we lose our self of being and mastering knowledge in the nature self of becoming and movement and action. And though we know intimately the movement, we do not know it dominatingly and fully. That means even if I know that I am angry, there is a certain identification, but I don't know fully what it is, why it has come, what is the nature of that anger, how intense it is. We don't know. This would not be the case if we carry into our identification with the movement, our identity with the rest of our subjective existence. In other words, I know myself fully. Okay? If you go into your psychic being, then you know yourself fully. If that is to say, we could plunge wholly into the wave of becoming and at the same time be in the very absorption of the state or act the mental witness. So it is not only the psychic being but also the self. If you are in the self, you can still, it is possible to become part of the becoming. That's what Sylvia is saying. Okay. So in other words, you are in 2 levels. You are in the spiritual plane of consciousness and you are also in the physical plane of consciousness. Okay. That's what Sylvia is saying. That was the what yogis usually do. That's of course. This would not be the case if we carried our identity into our identification with the movement, our identity with the rest of the subjective existence. If that is to say, we could plunge wholly into the wave of becoming. The wave of becoming is your body, mind, life. And at the same time, be in the very absorption of the state or act, the mental witness, observer, controller. But this we cannot easily do because we live in a divided consciousness in which the mighty part of us, our life nature of force and desire and passion and action, tends to control or swallow the mind, and the mind has to avoid this subjection and control the vital, but can only succeed in the effort by keeping itself separate. To a certain extent, our mind at level 1, our mind can control the vital, can, but not fully. The vital is too strong for the mind normally to be controlled. And even if you control it, it is more likely to be a suppression, but not a control. Okay? Suppression is not control. But only succeed in the effort by keeping itself separate. For if it identifies itself, it is lost and hurried away in the life movement. That means when you are in the self, when you are in spiritual plane of level 2, and you want to know and identify yourself with your body, mind, life to a certain extent, that is possible. But if you identify yourself fully with the body, mind, life, you lose your witness stance. You come down and again you are in the old nature. That's what Swami is saying. Okay? For it identifies itself, it is lost and hurried away in the life movement. The life movement is your identification with body, mind, life. So it's risky to do that when you are in the plane of spiritual consciousness, the self, Brahman. It is better to remain separate and only watch as a witness. Okay. So, nevertheless, a kind of balanced double identity by division is possible, though it is not easy to keep the balance. There is a self of thought which observes and permits the passion for the sake of the experience. Look at the words, permits the passion for the sake of the experience. You identify yourself with your thoughts, or is obliged by some life stress to permit it. Okay, both the things are possible. The life stress is allowing your identification with the thoughts, and there is a sort of self of life which allows itself to be carried along the movement of nature. Here then, in our subjective experience, we have a feel for the action of consciousness in which three movements of cognition can meet together: a separate kind of knowledge by identity, and knowledge by direct control, and dependent upon them, a separated knowledge. So all these are possible. It's pretty complicated because we have to understand what he's saying. So I'll read the summary of this. It may be helpful. I'll read it slowly. The summary is my own words. A total identification with what I want to know is possible. So too is a partial identification with separation possible. Both the things are possible. This is because there is in both life and mind two things. There is a mind stuff, which is substance, and a mind energy, which is the life prana. So too, in the vital, we have a life stuff substance and a life energy. But these are small elements in us, and there is no necessity for complete identification with either thought or emotion. We can detach ourselves from both thought and emotion, and even body. By a mental or spiritual separation, we can make ourselves independent of body, life, mind, and attain liberation. This is going to the second plane, second level, that is the spiritual planes of consciousness. You have lost your identification with body, mind, life, and you are in the self, in the Brahman consciousness. You are witness. That is liberation. We can become merely witness, sakshi, or knower, okay, jnata, or even the master, Ishvara, Purushottam. All these are possible. So we are discussing the whole range. Okay, we can do this, we can do this, we can do this. We have thus a knowledge by identity of ourselves, such as we cannot have of the world outside. I can know myself quite well, just as I cannot know others, but I can know myself. That's one type of knowledge, such as we cannot have of the outside. And we have also a knowledge by detached observation, which uses direct contact, such as in the self, where detachment is possible and knowledge is also complete. Then next he says, but if this detachment is not complete, we lose contact with the self and are rushed into the streaming action of nature. So the first time you experience a witness consciousness, if you are not careful, and you pay too much attention to the physical world and your own body, mind, life, you will drop again back to level 1. That's what Sid is saying. So it becomes only an experience and not a realization. A realization is when your consciousness is absolutely stabilized in level 2, in the Brahman consciousness. Now you cannot, even if you look at the body, mind, life, your own body as well as others in the world, you will never be able to fall down again. But that takes a long time. There are a series of experiences, and finally you get stabilized in the higher level of consciousness for yogis. But the same process also applies at the last level. You can have glimpses of the supermind, but you cannot become entirely settled in the supermind. Into self or nature, we become ignorant. We become ignorant. When we are at level 1 and identified with body, mind, life, we are in ignorance. This rising into self, witness, consciousness is not easy since we live in a divided consciousness. Mind must learn to detach itself from vital and body and even its own thoughts. Very difficult, but it can be done. Actually, we see that even in the separation of the witness self, the mind allows its movement in nature. So too, the vital permits itself to be sucked into nature's action. Then we have then 3 ways of knowledge. Knowledge by identity, that's a supramental. Knowledge by direct contact, which is the self. And knowledge by separation in the senses. This is what he has said in the previous paragraph. They explained all the 3 methods, but he has not discussed the 4th, which is a reduced form of the first one. Okay, so we have still about more than 10 minutes, so we can read the next one. In thought, separation of the thinker and the thinking is more difficult. So maybe Sunki can read today.
Yes, I will read.
Okay, go ahead. In thought.
In thought, separation of the thinker and the thinking is more difficult. The thinker is plunged and lost in the thought or carried in the thought current, identified with it. It is not usually at the time of or in the very act of thinking that he can observe or review his thoughts. He has to do that in retrospect and with the aid of memory or by a critical pause or corrective judgment before he proceeds further. But still, a simultaneity of thinking and conscious direction of the mind's action can be achieved. Does not engross entirely when the thinker acquires the faculty of stepping back into the mental self and standing apart there from the mental energy. Instead of being observed in the thought with a vague feeling of the process of thinking, and see the process by a mental vision, watch our thoughts in their origination and movement, and partly by a silent insight, partly by a process of thought upon thought, judge and evaluate them. But whatever the kind of identification, be noted that the knowledge of internal movements is of a double nature, and direct contact. For even when we detach ourselves, contact is maintained. Knowledge is always based on a direct contact, on a cognition, direct awareness, carrying in it an element of identity. The more separative attitude, ordinarily, the method of reason in observing and knowing our inner movements. The more intimate is the method of our dynamic part of mind, associating itself with our senses, feelings, and desires. But in this association too, the thinking mind can intervene and exercise a separative dissociated observation and control over both the dynamic self-associating part of mind and the vital or physical. All these observable movements of our physical being also are known and controlled by us, both these ways, the self and the intimate. Feel the body and what it is doing intimately as a part of us, but find it separate from it and can as a detached control over its movement. This gives to our normal knowledge of our subjective being and nature incomplete and largely superficial, though it still is, yet, so far as it goes, a certain intimacy, immediacy, and directness that is absent in our knowledge of the world outside us, its movements and objects. For there, since the thing seen or experienced is not self, not experienced as part of us, no entirely direct contact of our consciousness with the object is possible. An instrumentation of a self to be used, which offers us not immediate intimate of it, but a figure of it as a datum for knowledge.
Datum. Datum is the singular, data is the plural. Okay. So this is a very big para, and I don't think we'll be able to finish. So what I'll do is I'll just summarize the thing, and then we get the basic idea of what to say. It's a very long thing, and always Swami goes into great detail in his paragraphs. So if you have to discuss all the different details, then it takes time. So I just read out the summary to you, and that also is quite big. So, then we get the main idea. That's the whole purpose of the summary. Now he's saying, when we look at our thoughts, okay, we are normally identified with the thought. I am thinking. It does not look like a thought is occurring in me and I am looking at my thought. Sometimes it is there. Suppose you have thought something, but part of you is looking and saying, why did this thought come into my mind? Okay, it's not a good thought. When you feel something a little jealous of somebody or you are resentful of somebody, then that you observe and say, well, this is not good. So in other words, you are not identifying yourself with your thought, but you are looking at your thought. But so they're saying that's not easy. That's very difficult. But partially possible. Everybody does it. Yes, I should not have got angry. I should not have had this thought. Next day you will say. But it should happen immediately. That immediately normally does not happen. When I look at my thought, I'm identified with my thought and I say, I am thinking. That's it. So separation between thinker and thought. I'm now going to read the summary. The separation between thinker and thought is more difficult to achieve. Even when it is done, it is only retrospective. That means afterwards. And when the thought is occurring, it's very difficult to separate yourself. But that is possible when you are in the Brahman consciousness, but not in your level 1, not possible. The separation between thinker and thought is more difficult to achieve. Even when done, it is only retrospective, afterwards, not simultaneous. This, the analysis, judgment, evaluation is after the thought has occurred, not during the thought. Normally, this is what happens with us. However, a simultaneous separation between thinker and thought can be partial. When the thought is not engrossing, the separation can be complete. When the thinker becomes capable of detaching himself fully and watching the thinking process with a silent mind. So this is possible. But that's possible normally only at the Brahman level. Let us note that even here, there is a double movement, a separation and yet a direct contact through subtle senses. This is the nature of knowledge in the witness, self-consciousness. Brahman consciousness or Atma. This is what happens. You have separated yourself fully from your thoughts and your emotions and even your body actions. You are not doing it. You are only watching and somebody else is doing it. Then the nature of our reason is more separation and less identity and contact. Their reason is the one that analyzes, it never synthesizes. So reason is capable of separation. If you are a very intelligent person with a lot of reason, you will always watch your own psychological movements and judge them for yourself. This is good and this is not so good. So the nature of our reason is more inclined towards separation and less inclined towards identity and contact. The nature of the vital mind is more identification and less separation. Okay? The vital mind is more leaning towards identification and less separation. But even here, the rational mind can step back and exert some control over the vital and physical actions. This we have already discussed. To a certain extent, even our mind can control the vital, but it's more likely to be suppression and not really control. Reason can observe body, can observe vital, but cannot easily observe its own thoughts. That's more difficult. The direct intimacy and knowledge, however imperfect, of our own subjective being is not possible for the objective world outside ourselves. Therefore, nature equips us with senses for an at least indirect contact. So now we can say that direct contact uses subtle senses. That means to say, if I can see your thoughts, I am using subtle senses and not gross senses. But indirect contact, when I am seeing you at level 1, okay, I am hearing or you are hearing me, it is the ears, the physical ears which are hearing. So it is indirect contact, you are using gross physical senses. This is what he said in the panel. And it's 8:33. So we will take this up next time in detail. The summary is not very difficult to understand. But when we go into the language, so when we go to language, we have to understand. Okay, so we'll do that next time. So something has to note. We have read, but we have to redo page 546.
Thank you, Rangada.
Okay.
Jawar Kunumo.
Have a nice day.
Thank you, Rangada.
Thank you, Rangada. Thank you.